He took 8 blades for an alien child, then woke to find royal warriors now keeping watch. When consciousness returned, it came in stuttering waves of sound and light and pain, like someone slowly turning up the volume on a broken old radio. Ethan became aware first of the beeping, steady, insistent, not quite matching the frantic rhythm of his heart. Then came the sensation of weight, of being held down by his own body, by gravity that seemed suddenly personal and vindictive. He tried to move his fingers and felt resistance, then the tug of a line taped to the back of his hand. For a moment he thought, hospital. Then he remembered the last thing he had seen, and that word shattered like glass. There had been steel and screaming, and a small blue face, eyes wide with terror. 8 blades, he thought dimly. 8. His ribs burned with a distant, muffled ache, like someone else's pain echoing through his bones. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. He forced his eyes open and was hit with blue. Not just one shade, but layers of it. The soft glow from an overhead ring of light, the cool tone of the walls, the faint wash of color in the air itself, as though the room was filtering reality through a thin film of ocean water. And, standing around his bed, around him, were figures that could not possibly exist if he was still on Earth. They were tall, every one of them, their skin a smooth gradient of sapphire and silver. Their armor caught the light and thinned it into razor-edged reflections, glyphs flowing along their breastplates with a faint luminescent pulse. Helms were tucked under arms or resting at their hips, revealing faces sharp and regal, with angular cheekbones and ridged brows that looked carved rather than grown. Their eyes, though, were strangely, unsettlingly familiar, focused, alert, and filled with something that looked a lot like worry. He blinked up at them, disoriented, try and count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 adult aliens, each standing like a living pillar of polished metal and ice, plus one smaller figure at the side of the bed. The small one sat in a chair that seemed designed just for her, legs swinging slightly above the floor. Her armor was simpler, lighter, with softer lines, and her skin tone was a brighter, almost luminous cyan. Her hair, if it was hair, was a cascade of delicate filaments that shifted when she breathed, shimmering from deep blue to white at the tips. She had her hand on his, tiny fingers resting over the band of medical tape, and when his gaze finally settled on her, her eyes overflowed with relief so raw it punched through the fog in his mind. "You are awake," she whispered, her voice a chiming, melodic thing that still somehow carried the weight of everything unsaid. Her other hand tightened around the bed's guardrail, small knuckles paling. The healer said there was a chance he would not return to the light. She glanced up at the tallest warrior, as if confirming she was allowed to speak. The tall one gave a faint nod, unreadable expression shifting in a way Ethan guessed might be approval. He swallowed, throat dry, and tried to talk. The first attempt came out as a rasp that could barely be called sound. He licked his cracked lips, feeling something cool touch them. A curved metal straw, held by a woman standing at his left. She wore the same armor as the others, but part of her cuirass was embossed with a symbol that glowed faint white, like a stylized spiral. Her features were softer, eyes framed by faint markings that might have been tattoos or natural patterns. "Drink," she said, in careful but clear Terran standard. Hearing his language from her lips was a shock almost as big as seeing her. Slowly, "Your fluids are depleted." He obeyed, taking a few small sips of water that tasted faintly sweet and mineral-heavy. It slid down his parched throat like mercy. When he nodded slightly that he'd had enough, she withdrew the straw and set it into a slot in the hovering stand beside him. He followed the motion with his gaze and noticed the rest of the room at last. The bed was suspended slightly above the floor, surrounded by translucent panels that displayed shifting symbols he didn't recognize. Bags of pale liquid drifted within gravlock frames, and a soft field of light wrapped around his chest like a second skin, pulsing gently in time with his breathing. Memories returned in jagged fragments. The bizarre dome, the festival lights, The alien child separated from her group, standing too close to the procession route. The sudden shriek of someone shouting in a language he didn't know, the flash of metal, the realization that the blades weren't decoration, but weapons hurled toward the small figure who hadn't even had time to turn. He remembered the decision as a pure, clean line through his mind. Move. There had been no time for anything else. He remembered the impact, each blade a separate note in a brutal chord across his body, then the sensation of falling. He remembered the child's scream, breaking into a sound like his own name. Ethan. He hadn't told her his name. Had he? Where? His voice broke again, but at least it existed now. Where am I? In the royal ward of the Starhold. The tallest warrior answered. Her voice was deeper, edged with command. She stepped closer, and Ethan saw that her armor was more ornate than the others. Crest rising like a crown from her collar, the metal worked into intricate layered plates. You are within our capital vessel, human Ethan Cole. You stand, well, lie, under the protection of the Lat-Hari Dominion, by right of blood debt and royal decree. That was a lot of nouns for someone who still felt like his bones had been turned into glass. Ethan focused on the one word that had a clear, emotional weight. Protection, he echoed. The small girl straightened in her chair, her hand trembling slightly over his. You took the blades meant from me, she said. All eight. You did not flee, though you had no armor, no shield, no obligation. You used your body as one. Her voice caught, and she swallowed. Such an act binds us. Our laws, they are very clear. He stared at her, trying to reconcile the reality of her presence with the flicker of memory, the little silhouette against the crowd, the flared cloak of the attackers, the arcs of silver slicing the air. You're okay? He asked, eyes scanning her small frame as though expecting to find some hidden wound. You're not hurt. She shook her head quickly, filaments shimmering. I am untouched, she said, and the words held both guilt and gratitude. Because of you. The woman with the spiral crest stepped forward. The healers removed all 8 penetrations, she said, and Ethan flinched despite himself. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. Your internal damage was extensive, but your species' resilience is impressive. And you had assistance. She touched the glowing field over his chest. Our mendic field accelerated your cellular knitting. Still, you hovered near the boundary for 3 of your planet cycles. 3 days, Ethan translated automatically, mind catching on the familiar unit. 3 days unconscious. That explained the way his body felt like it had been both asleep and dragged behind a starship. The attackers? Dead, the tallest warrior said without hesitation. Struck down by my honor guard before their blades finished their arc. Their allegiance is under investigation. She exchanged a brief look with the woman at his side. Their aim was precise. They targeted the royal path. They targeted the princess. Ethan's gaze snapped back to the small girl. Princess. The armor, the protective ring of warriors, the way everyone seemed to calibrate their every motion around her. He had thrown himself in front of a stranger. Apparently, that stranger was royalty. The child, Princess, watched his realization dawn with solemn eyes. My name is Asra, she said, daughter of High Matriarch Velith of the Lat-Hari Dominion. By standing between me and certain death, you have intertwined your fate with mine. It is not a small thing. She spoke the words like a recitation, something learned, but her voice vibrated with something distinctly personal. Ethan tried to laugh, but it came out as a pained cough. One of the warriors on the far side of the bed reached instinctively toward the field controls, then checked herself when a healer raised a hand. So, I interrupted an assassination, he managed hoarsely. Wouldn't be the first time I've accidentally walked into trouble, but that's a new record. He swallowed, eyes closing briefly as pain flared under the field. I didn't know who she was. I just saw the blades. That is precisely why it matters, the tallest warrior said quietly. Had you acted for advantage, the debt would be different. Smaller. Negotiable. She lifted her chin, eyes luminous. I am Commander Sereth Varen, captain of the Sovereign Guard. All here serve under my command, and all witnessed your act. We have sworn to stand sentinel over you until the matriarch herself pronounces your fate. The phrase your fate was not especially comforting, but Ethan was too tired to process all its potential meanings. Instead, his attention snagged on something else. He turned his head slightly to look around the room again. The 5 towering warriors stood in a loose circle around his bed, posture relaxed but ready, hands never far from the hilts of weapons that rested in sleek sheaths along their legs or spine. Their eyes constantly scanned the rooms, entrances, the ceiling vents, even the corners where the light pooled. They weren't gathered here for a symbolic vigil. They were on duty, guarding him. Why, elite warriors? He asked slowly. I mean, I get that your princess is important, but she's right there. He tilted his chin faintly toward the girl at his side. Shouldn't you be guarding her? Not some random mechanic from Earth who made a really bad impulse decision. A faint ripple of something like amusement traveled through the group. The warrior furthest to his right, whose armor bore twin vertical stripes across the chest, allowed the corner of her mouth to twitch upward. Commander Seraph, however, remained grave. You are no longer random, she said. Under Lathari law, anyone who interposes themselves between a royal and mortal harm becomes Keth Varen, bloodbound. Until the matriarch rules otherwise, your well-being is a matter of state security. Those who sought to kill the princess may now seek to erase the one who thwarted them and who could identify their methods. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature slide down his spine. So, I didn't just nearly die, he muttered. I bought myself a target on my back as part of the deal. Princess Asura's fingers tightened again around his hand. You speak as though you regret it, she said softly, some fragile thread in her tone pulling at his attention. Do you? He looked at her, really looked, past the shimmering skin and alien features and ceremonial armor that sat slightly too big on her small shoulders. She was a kid, a child who would have been sliced to pieces in front of a cheering festival crowd if he hadn't moved. The memory of those blades, how close they had come, was enough to make his chest constrict in a way that had nothing to do with his injuries. No, he said, with more strength than he expected. I don't regret it. I just wish the universe handed out safer ways to make new friends. For a heartbeat, she stared at him. Then something flickered across her face that might have been the Lathari equivalent of a laugh. It came out as a little puff of breath, her eyes brightening, her filaments lifting. Around the bed, shoulders that had been stiff with tension eased by a fraction. The healer, if that was the right term, leaned over him again, consulting a holographic panel that unfolded from her wrist. Your humor is intact, she observed. This is a good sign. But you must rest, Ethan Cole. Your tissue knitting is only at 72%. Excessive emotional stimulation will slow repair. Commander, perhaps. We will remain quiet, Seraph said, though there was something stubborn in the set of her jaw that made Ethan suspect she did not often accept other suggestions. But I will not remove the princess from this chamber while he is unstable. She insisted upon being here when he woke, and the bond demands respect. The bond, Ethan repeated faintly. Right? And what does this bond actually mean? Asura answered before anyone else could. It means, she said, voice steady now, that you are under my protection as much as I am under yours. It means your enemies become mine, and mine become yours. It means if the matriarch decrees it, you may never again leave Lathari care, for your death would dishonor our line. She hesitated, then added in a whisper barely audible, it means you are not alone anymore. The last sentence landed with unexpected weight. Ethan's mind flashed, unbidden, to the small bunk on the cargo ship he had worked on for the last 5 years. The lonely stars shining through the viewport as he flipped a wrench between his fingers, trying not to think about how many light years separated him from anyone who might notice if he simply vanished. Out here, humans were still newcomers, their presence tolerated but not exactly cherished. He was used to being background noise, replaceable. Now, in a room full of armored aliens who stood like statues around his bed, with a princess holding his hand as if it were an anchor, the idea of being not alone pressed against old, unfamiliar places inside him. He cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, he said, trying for lightness and only partly succeeding. I guess that explains the royal warriors at my bedside. Sort of an upgrade from the last time I wound up in a med bay. That one had a leaky ceiling and a nurse who hated humans. Then you are fortunate to have bled on us instead, the striped warrior remarked dryly. We take our debts seriously. Before Ethan could respond, the door to the ward hissed open with a soft exhale of air. All 5 warriors shifted subtly, their relaxed focus snapping instantly to full alert. A new figure stepped through, cloaked in a deep indigo mantle that flowed like liquid shadow. The glyphs along the walls brightened, responding to her presence, and even Commander Sereth inclined her head in a gesture that might have been respect or deference, or both. Asura rose from her chair, so fast it nearly tipped. "Mother," she breathed. Ethan's heartbeat spiked, monitors chiming in protest. He had a sudden, irrational urge to sit up straighter, but his body refused to comply. As the cloaked figure drew back her hood, revealing a face older and more severe than Asura's, but undeniably similar, he realized he was looking at the woman whose child he had saved, the leader of an interstellar dominion, if titles meant what he thought they did. The high matriarch of the Lathari studied him in silence, her eyes like captured starlight, and he felt very small and very human and very breakable under that gaze. Then, slowly, she stepped to the side of the bed opposite her daughter. "So," she said, in flawless Terran standard that carried the echo of ancient authority, "this is the human who caught my daughter's destiny in his hands and refused to let it fall." Ethan swallowed, throat dry again despite the water. He managed. "Hi." Her lips curved, just a fraction. "We have much to discuss, Ethan Cole," she said. "But for now, know this. The blades you took from my child have cut into the heart of my court. You have made powerful enemies without meaning to. And you have made powerful allies just as unintentionally." She glanced briefly at Asura, then back at him. "Whether you survive, what follows will depend on more than my healers. It will depend on your choices, your ingenuity, and your willingness to stand between worlds once more." He looked at the circle of warriors, at the princess whose small hand still clung to his, at the luminous glyphs painting the walls with shifting light. Somewhere beyond this room, an entire starship full of beings was moving, deciding, plotting around an event he had triggered with one reckless act. He felt fear, yes, a cold tremor spreading through his chest, but beneath it, something else stirred. A stubborn, human thing that had carried his species from caves to starships. The sense that if the universe was going to throw him into the center of a storm, he would damn well try to steer. "I've already taken 8 blades," Ethan said quietly, meeting the matriarch's eyes. Seems a shame to waste that investment. For the first time, genuine amusement flashed across her features. "So be it," she murmured. "Rest, human. When next you wake, we will begin unraveling the web that sought my daughter's life. And now, by extension, yours." As the Mendic field hummed softly and his eyelids grew heavy again, Ethan felt the weight of elite warriors' gazes settle like a shield over him. He had stepped in front of death once on instinct. Now, with an empire watching, he would have to decide what that instinct meant and how far he was willing to let it carry him. Ethan drifted in and out of sleep as the Mendic field pulsed softly around his ribs, a steady rhythm that soothed the sharpest edges of pain but couldn't quite dispel the sense of unease curling under his skin. Every time he surfaced toward consciousness, he heard the quiet murmur of armored figures shifting their weight, the low hum of energy weapons ready to fire, and the patient breathing of Princess Asura sitting beside him. He wasn't used to being watched, much less guarded, and waking to find elite warriors stationed around his bed felt like living inside someone else's life. When he finally woke enough to remain aware, the room was dimmer than before. The light overhead had softened to a pale glow, mimicking evening tones. Asura still sat in her chair, though now she leaned forward with her arms draped over the mattress, half asleep, her filaments dimmed to a soft silver. 2 guards stood at the door, one at each side like statues carved from living cobalt. Commander Sereth wasn't visible, which somehow made Ethan even more nervous. If she wasn't here, it meant she was dealing with something important, something likely connected to the attack. He shifted slightly, wincing as a line pulled. One of the guards reacted instantly, stepping forward before realizing he wasn't in danger. "You are restless," she said quietly. "Your discomfort is returning?" "No, just thinking." Ethan's voice was low, still hoarse. "How long was I out this time?" "Half a cycle," the guard replied. "Your species requires more sleep than ours." "This is expected." Asura stirred at the sound of their voices, straightening with a sudden blink. Her filaments flared from silver to pale blue. "Ethan," she breathed, relieved. "You woke again. Your breathing changed. I thought it might be pain." "It's fine," he said, though his chest still felt like someone had folded him wrong and tried to glue him back together. "Just trying to stretch without snapping anything." "You must not stretch," the guard said sternly. "Your inner lattice has not fully stabilized." "My what?" Asura's expression softened. "Our healers replaced what your body could not repair by itself. They rebuilt the structure beneath your ribs with a synthetic lattice that dissolves as your cells regrow. If you move too suddenly, the lattice could misalign." "Well, that sounds horrifying," Ethan muttered. "So no stretching." "Got it." Asura hesitated, then climbed carefully onto the side of the bed, sitting near his hip as though afraid he might vanish if she wasn't close enough. "I spoke to my mother after you slept," she said softly. "She is meeting with the Circle Council to determine how the attack could have happened." "And what does the Circle Council do?" Ethan asked. "They advise the matriarch," Asura said, "and they handle matters of succession, diplomacy, internal conflict, and treason." "Treason," Ethan repeated, exhaling through his nose. "So they think someone inside your government ordered the hit?" Asura glanced down at her hands. "They think someone within our borders allowed danger near the royal path. Whether they meant for me specifically to die is still unknown. But the attackers carried weapons etched with void metal. Such metal is forbidden. Someone gave it to them. Someone high-ranking." Ethan absorbed that uneasily. He had imagined political intrigue on alien worlds, but he hadn't planned on being stuck in the middle of it. "And where does that leave me?" Asura looked up at him, her eyes luminous. "Bound to us, and in danger." He sighed, sinking deeper into the pillows. "Figures. Save one kid, inherit a galactic conspiracy." Before Asura could respond, the door hissed open and Commander Sereth entered with 2 more warriors behind her. Her posture was rigid, more severe than before, and her armor bore fresh scoring along one shoulder, as though she had only just come from a skirmish. Ethan tensed. "What happened?" Sereth motioned sharply, and the guards at the door stepped aside. "You are moving," she observed, the faintest approval flickering in her eyes. "Good. We may require that strength sooner than expected." "That is not comforting," Ethan said. Sereth ignored the remark. "We intercepted a scout drone bearing the insignia of the Veshk Syndicate. It was attempting to enter Starhold airspace illegally." "Is that bad?" Ethan asked. Asura answered before Sereth could. "The Veshk hate us," she whispered. "They hate all Dominion houses. If they send a drone, it means they know someone tried to kill me. And they may see opportunity in chaos," Sereth finished. "The matriarch has ordered a lockdown of all outer rings. No vessel enters or exits without triple authentication." Ethan frowned. "And what does that mean for me?" Sereth studied him carefully. "It means, human, that whoever orchestrated the attack may now fear you survived, and may try again before the matriarch makes a ruling. You are no longer merely a witness. You are leverage." Asura moved closer to him protectively. "He will not be harmed," she said fiercely. "I won't allow it." Sereth's gaze softened, though only slightly. "Princess, no one here doubts your resolve. But the enemy does not fight with honor. They will seek the weakest point. And that's me," Ethan said dryly. "No," Sereth corrected. "It is the one who believes the human is defenseless." The implication hung in the air like static. Asura's eyes widened. Ethan felt a chill. Sereth continued. "We must relocate you to a secure ward, and the princess must remain under double guard." "No," Asura said immediately. "I will not leave him." "Asura," Sereth warned. He saved my life, she insisted. I will not abandon his. Ethan swallowed, caught between gratitude and an ache he couldn't name. Asura, you don't need to. She shook her head fiercely. Yes, I do. Sereth exhaled slowly. Then the matriarch must be informed of your choice. Your bond is already complicated enough. My bond, Ethan echoed. Sereth met his gaze. Human, your life is now tied to the royal line. What happens to you ripples through our political structure. There are those who would kill you to weaken the throne, and those who would protect you because your death would stain it. Ethan stared at her, stunned. So, he said weakly, this is what happens when you try to do something decent. Asura's small hand tightened around his. Sometimes, she whispered, decency changes destinies. Ethan let the words hang in the air, heavy and surreal. The room felt smaller somehow, compressed by implications he barely understood. He had wanted to help a frightened child in a crowded bazaar. He had not intended to rewrite the political geometry of an alien empire. He had certainly not intended to acquire enemies with names like Syndicate. But life, he reflected grimly, rarely cared what he intended. Commander Sereth signaled to one of her guards, who immediately tapped a panel on the wall. The room shifted subtly as layered shielding fields activated. He couldn't see them, but he felt the faint prickling along his skin, the same sensation he remembered from stepping too close to a charged engine coil. Asura inhaled softly at the sensation. Her filaments lifted and fanned out like a crown. We must prepare to move him, Sereth said. Carefully, the healers will construct a mobile Menda cradle. It will preserve the structural lattice during transit. Ethan tried not to imagine his ribs shattering if the cradle malfunctioned. Is this really necessary? No, Sereth said. It is critical. Asura slid off the bed and approached Sereth with visible worry. Where will he be taken? To the inner citadel deck, Sereth answered. Only high command, the royal household, and the matriarch herself may enter without explicit clearance. Asura's eyes widened. Mother will allow that. She has already ordered it, Sereth replied. The attack has escalated from a matter of royal security to a Dominion-wide alert. No one involved foresaw the human surviving. His existence is now a destabilizing factor. Ethan winced. Yeah, that sounds about right. I destabilize things a lot. Mostly kitchen shelves and poorly built ladders. One of the guards let out a startled breath that could almost be laughter. Sereth shot her a sharp look, but even she seemed unable to entirely suppress the slight tilt of her mouth. You will remain under protection, Sereth said evenly. And Princess Asura will be assigned a doubled watch. I don't want doubled watch, Asura said, frowning. I want to stay with Ethan. Sereth's expression tightened. Princess. No, Asura stepped in front of Ethan's bed, small yet immovable. If his life is tied to mine, then mine must be tied to his. I will not leave his side. The defiance in her voice startled Ethan. She might look fragile, and she might barely come up to Sereth's chest, but there was steel under her skin. Royal steel. Sereth inhaled slowly, clearly struggling between duty, tradition, and the undeniable will of her future sovereign. Your safety is not greater than his, Asura interrupted. Ethan tried to intervene. Look, Asura, really it's okay. I don't want you in more danger because of me. Asura turned to him, her eyes bright with fierce sincerity. You did not turn away from danger when I needed you. I will not turn away from you. The words struck him harder than any blade. He had saved people before, accidentally, purposefully, impulsively, but he had never been bound to them, never had someone look at him with that much intention, that much certainty. Sarah sighed, clearly defeated. Princess, I will inform the matriarch of your decision, but she will not take this lightly. Good, Asura said. Neither do I. Another guard stepped forward. Commander, the healers report the mobile cradle is being calibrated. Then we move immediately, Sereth said, composure snapping back into place. Escort the princess to the corridor until the room is secured. I will not. Ethan lifted a hand weakly. Asura, it's fine. I'll be here. Go with them for now. She hesitated, torn, then finally nodded. Only for now, she said softly, touching his hand one last time before stepping back toward the guards. I will return as soon as they allow it. As she left the room, Ethan felt an unexpected emptiness settle in the space she had occupied. Her presence, strange as it was, had become something steadying, a tether. When the door closed behind her, Sereth turned to him. "Human Ethan," she said quietly, "you must understand something." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. The princess's bond to you is no small matter. It is not symbolic. It is not ceremonial. It is law woven into ancient custom. If she stays at your side, then her safety becomes indistinguishable from your own. And there are those who will use that connection to strike at her, to strike at the throne." Ethan swallowed. "You're saying I'm a liability." "I am saying you are a fulcrum," Sereth corrected. "If you fall, the royal balance shifts. And if the royal balance shifts, the dominion may fracture." He stared at her, stunned. "All because I jumped in front of some knives?" Her eyes softened by a fraction. "You misunderstand. Such an act is not common among our people. Ladhari are logical, calculated. We do not throw ourselves into danger unless necessary. Humans do," Ethan said quietly. "A lot. It is why the matriarch respects your species," Sereth admitted. "But it is also why some fear you." Great, Ethan thought. Not only enemies, but xenophobic cultural misunderstandings. Perfect. Before he could respond, the door hissed open again. This time, a team of healers entered, pushing a floating frame shaped like a half-shell of translucent light. It hummed softly, emitting a gentle ripple of energy that made the room feel warmer. "The cradle is ready," one healer said. "His vitals must be stabilized before transfer." Ethan braced himself. "This is going to hurt, isn't it?" "No," the healer said. Then, after a pause, "Not significantly." "That's comforting." The next few minutes blurred into a haze of movement. Healers adjusting the Mendic field, guards repositioning, Sereth issuing sharp commands, the cradle lowering beside the bed like the open mouth of some luminous creature. Wires detached. Light shifted. Pressure built along his ribs. "Steady," one healer murmured. "Do not tense." "I'll keep that in mind while you detach half my insides," Ethan muttered. Then, with agonizing slowness, they lifted him. Every nerve fired. Every breath caught. But he endured it, gripping the side of the cradle with trembling fingers as his body finally settled into the new support field. He exhaled shakily. Sereth nodded once. "Move out." The guards formed a tight formation around him as the cradle floated forward. And as the door opened, Ethan saw, for the first time, the scale of the starhold beyond his room. The corridor beyond his room stretched like the interior of some vast metallic cathedral. Curving walls arched high overhead, ribbed with bands of glowing script that shifted in slow patterns, breathing light in and out as though the ship were alive. Platforms floated silently along invisible tracks. A faint current of air carried traces of something floral. Alien, crisp, familiar, and unfamiliar at once. Ethan stared despite himself, the pain fading beneath, awe. Commander Sereth moved at the front of the formation, her stride long and confident. Two guards flanked the cradle on either side, weapons magnetized to their armor, but hands poised near the grips. Another pair guarded the rear. Ethan felt absurdly like a dignitary being escorted, except dignitaries typically weren't pale, injured humans lying in a medical contraption and wearing nothing but a loose healing tunic. Asura was waiting just outside the threshold of the corridor, flanked by two additional guards, her posture rigid with impatience. As soon as she saw Ethan emerge, she stepped forward, but the guard nearest her extended a hand, blocking her gently but firmly. "Princess," Sereth said without looking back, "remain within the protective ring." Asura frowned but obeyed, shifting only enough to keep Ethan in sight as the formation began moving down the corridor. "I told you I'd be right behind you," Ethan said with a weak smile. "See? Still alive." Asura's eyes softened. "I count that as a victory." Ethan chuckled, then winced as the motion tugged at the Mendic field. "Let's hope we can collect enough victories to make a whole set." The corridor opened into a larger artery, one bustling with Lathari in various armor styles, robes, or sleek uniforms. Conversations tapered off as the group passed. Ethan could feel eyes lingering on him, curious, analytical, shocked. A few individuals dipped their heads toward Asura with deep respect, but most stared at him as though he were a puzzle piece jammed into the wrong box. What were they thinking? Ethan murmured. Asura glanced at him. Many have never seen a human up close. Some have never seen one at all, and none have witnessed one reinterpret our law of blood-bound destiny. Ethan winced. Yeah, about that. If you ever want to reinterpret it back to something less life-threatening, I fully support that. Asura's filaments fluttered in what he assumed was amusement. It does not work that way. Of course it doesn't, he muttered. As the corridor widened again, Ethan's attention snapped to a set of massive windows flanking the walkway. He inhaled sharply at the sight beyond them. Space. Not the dull black he was used to from human freighters, but a sprawling canvas of color and motion. The Starhold orbited a gas giant banded in violet and gold, its storms swirling in patterns like painted brushstrokes. Dozens of smaller vessels drifted near the ship's outer rings, their silhouettes sleek and elegant. Station lights glittered like constellations. It's beautiful, he whispered. Asura shifted closer. I have grown up inside these halls, she said. But sometimes I forget to look. With a view like that, Ethan shook his head. You shouldn't. Sareth glanced back briefly. Eyes forward, princess. Asura huffed softly, but she complied. The group continued moving, eventually entering a lift chamber where a circular platform awaited. Its surface rippled like water under tension. Sareth gestured, and the guards guided Ethan's cradle onto the platform. This will take us to the inner Citadel deck, Sareth said. No unauthorized entity can access it. Good, Ethan replied. I've had enough unauthorized entities for one lifetime. Sareth activated the platform. A column of light enveloped them, and the world shifted, smoothly, silently, as though gravity were an optional extra. When the light faded, they stood in a quieter, dimly lit corridor. The architecture here was older, marked by deeper carvings and symbols that glowed with softer tones. Asura stepped closer to Ethan's cradle, her expression less tense now. This is where our ancestors held council during the age of shattered orbits. It is the safest place in the Dominion. Ethan nodded. Good to know I'm not being stored in a broom closet. One of the rear guards cleared her throat politely. It is also where the matriarch keeps her personal chambers. Oh, Ethan said, blinking. So, I'm her neighbor now. Asura nodded solemnly. Yes, that feels like a promotion I didn't apply for. Sareth gave a low exhale that might have been the Lathari equivalent of a sigh. Human humor continues to confound our classifications. It confounds humans too, Ethan replied. They reached a door guarded by two warriors whose armor bore a crest shaped like intertwined rings. When Sareth approached, they bowed their heads. Commander, one said, the chamber is secured. No breaches detected. Good, Sareth said. Prepare for entry. The doors parted with a whisper, revealing a surprisingly small room inside. Warm, softly lit, with a raised alcove for the cradle and seating around it. It felt more like a sanctuary than a holding area. Asura stepped inside first, moving directly to Ethan's side as if she had never been forced away. Sareth waited until the guards were positioned before turning to him. Rest here, she instructed. The matriarch will join you shortly. And Ethan, he looked up. Whatever she asks, answer truthfully. She can see through falsehood as easily as breath. Ethan nodded slowly. I'll keep that in mind. Asura sat beside him, her hand resting near his. As the last guard sealed the door, she whispered, Do not fear her. She is stern, but she is good. Ethan exhaled, tension threading through him again. I'm not afraid, he said quietly. But he was. He was terrified. Minutes passed in thick, steady silence. The room hummed with a quiet resonance, a deeper vibration than the Mendic field, something structural, ancient, like the pulse of the ship's heart. Ethan lay still in the cradle, feeling the weight of every breath. Across from him, Asura perched on a cushioned bench carved from pale stone, her feet dangling just above the floor. She kept glancing toward the door, her filaments shifting in anxious flickers. "She will come soon," Asura murmured, more to herself than him. Ethan nodded weakly. "I figured. Royal mothers don't seem like the type to ignore whatever mess this is." "It is not a mess," Asura insisted, then hesitated. "Well, it is, but not because of you." He smiled faintly. "That's the nicest thing anyone's said to me in days." Asura's lips curved, but before she could speak again, the resonance in the room changed. It became sharper, brighter, as though the space itself was inhaling. A moment later, the door unsealed with a deep, rolling chime. The High Matriarch entered, silent, regal, draped in layers of indigo cloth that shimmered like shifting starlight. Her eyes swept the room, taking in every detail with surgical precision. The positioning of the guards, the stability of the cradle, the princess's posture, and finally Ethan himself. Asura straightened instantly. "Mother." "Asura," the matriarch replied, her voice calm but edged with gravity. "You may remain, but you will not interrupt." Asura bowed her head. "Yes, mother." Ethan felt suddenly very, very exposed. He forced himself to meet her gaze. It felt like staring into the center of a nebula, beautiful, overwhelming, unintelligible. The matriarch approached him slowly, hands clasped behind her back. "Human Ethan Cole," she began, her tone neither soft nor harsh. "Your actions have altered the trajectory of my house, my dominion, and my child's future. I must understand the nature of your choice." Ethan swallowed. "I didn't choose anything complicated. I saw a kid in danger. I moved. That is precisely what I wish to examine," she said. "You did not know her. You did not know our laws. You did not know you were stepping into the path of an assassination. And yet you acted. That's what humans do," Ethan said quietly. "Or some of us, anyway. We help people, even strangers." Her expression didn't change, but a faint ripple moved through her aura, an emotion Ethan could not name. "Is that truly so common among your kind?" "It should be," he said. "Sometimes it is." A moment of silence followed. Then she asked, "Did you intend to die?" Ethan froze. The question struck him like another blade. Asura inhaled sharply, but one warning glance from her mother kept her silent. "No," Ethan said slowly. "I didn't intend to die, but I didn't have time to think either. I just reacted." The matriarch circled the cradle, considering him from multiple angles, as though she were studying not just his body, but the shape of his choices. "Your species," she said, "is young, unpredictable, reckless. You surge into danger long before weighing the cost." "Yeah," Ethan admitted. "We're good at that." "And yet," she continued, "your kind has survived despite its flaws. Perhaps because of them." She stopped beside Asura, resting one hand gently atop her daughter's shoulder. Asura leaned into the touch. "You saved my child," the matriarch said softly, in a manner that defies Lathari doctrine. "We protect the collective. We do not risk ourselves for one, especially not one unrelated to us." "That sounds lonely," Ethan murmured. The matriarch's eyes softened, just slightly. "That," she said, "is what my daughter told me as well." Asura's cheeks brightened, filaments warming to soft blue. The matriarch continued, "Your recovery will be slow. Your enemies multiply with each revelation about your survival. But I must determine whether your presence endangers my daughter or strengthens her." Ethan inhaled. "I don't want to cause trouble for her, or for you. And yet trouble follows you," the matriarch said. "Not by malice, but by consequence." He winced. "I've noticed." The matriarch drew closer. "I must ask you something, and you must answer truthfully." Ethan nodded, throat dry. "Would you act the same way again?" she asked, "knowing what it has cost you?" Asura watched him with wide eyes, breath shallow. He thought of the bizarre lights, the scream he didn't understand, the blur of metal arcing toward a terrified child. He thought of 8 blades entering his body like lightning. He thought of waking alone in a ship corridor 5 years ago, feeling the weight of distance from any family he had left behind. and he thought of Asura's small hand holding his, refusing to let him face the world alone. "Yeah," he whispered. "I'd do it again." Asura blinked fast, filaments trembling. The matriarch inhaled deeply, closing her eyes for one long moment. When she opened them again, something in her expression had shifted, less guarded, more resolute. "So be it," she said. "Your bond stands." Asura exhaled shakily, relief flooding her features. Ethan blinked. "And what does that mean?" "It means," the matriarch said, "that you will remain under royal protection until the threat is neutralized. It means you will not be sent away. And it means—" She paused. "That harming you now equals harming my daughter. Any who attempt it will face the full wrath of the Dominion." Ethan's heart thudded. "That's a lot," he managed. "Yes," she agreed. "For all of us." Then her expression darkened. "But I fear your attackers have not given up. They will strike again. And next time, they may aim not at my child." Her gaze settled on him like a weight. "But at you." The warning lingered in the room like static after a lightning strike. Ethan's breath caught. He had known, on some instinctual background level, that surviving the attack made him a target. But hearing the matriarch say it aloud, in that calm, absolute tone, made the danger feel solid. Asura moved closer again, her filaments dimming with fear. "Mother, they will not reach him. We will prevent it." The matriarch did not contradict her daughter, but neither did she reassure her. She simply looked at Ethan with the steady, piercing clarity of someone accustomed to weighing the fate of worlds. "Your recovery must accelerate," she said. "The healers will enhance your treatment. Commander Sereth will increase security. But protection alone is insufficient." Ethan frowned. "Meaning what?" "You must learn," she said. "If you are to walk beside my daughter, even in the shadow of danger, you must understand our enemies, our customs, and the implications of your bond." Asura's eyes brightened. "I can teach him." "No," the matriarch said gently. "You are too close to the threat. You will remain near him, but you will not be his instructor." She glanced toward the door. "Sereth will handle that, and perhaps others, if she deems it necessary." Ethan blinked. "You're telling me I need lessons?" "I'm telling you," the matriarch said, "that ignorance is a vulnerability, and you cannot afford vulnerabilities." He exhaled, sinking slightly deeper into the cradle. "I was a ship engineer, a mechanic. I'm not a soldier. I'm not." His voice cracked under the weight of everything happening. "I'm not someone who changes political destinies." "And yet," the matriarch said softly, "you already have." He stared at her until she stepped back. Asura moved instinctively into the space her mother vacated, her presence grounding and warm. The matriarch turned toward the doorway. "I will confer with the Circle Council. We must determine who aided the assassins and how far their influence reaches." Her expression hardened. "And I will send word to our spies in the Veshk Syndicate. If they move against you, I will know." That wasn't reassuring. She paused at the threshold and spoke without looking back. "Human Ethan Cole, there is one more thing you must understand." He braced. "Okay, the bond you share with my daughter is not a chain." She glanced lightly toward Asura. "It is a thread, one that can strengthen or break, depending on how you choose to carry it." Asura held her breath. The matriarch continued. "If you walk this path, you will not walk it alone, but it will demand courage." Ethan swallowed. "I've had enough practice lately." A faint smile curved her lips. "Yes, you have." Then she left, the door sealing behind her with a soft chime. Silence fell. Asura exhaled shakily and sagged onto the bench again. "She did not forbid me from staying." "That's good," Ethan said slowly. "It's very good." Her filaments rippled gently. "She accepts you. She sees you." "Terrifying thought," he muttered. Asura's expression softened. "I was afraid she would send you away, or hide you somewhere I could not follow." "Would you have followed anyway?" he teased. "Yes," she said immediately and without hesitation. Ethan blinked. "Oh." She leaned closer, her voice dropping into a tender seriousness rarely seen in someone so young. "Ethan, when you stepped in front of those blades, you changed more than my fate. You changed how I see the world." He felt heat rise in his face. "You don't owe me anything, he whispered. No, Asura agreed. I choose everything I give. Silence stretched between them, deep but not uncomfortable. Then Asura straightened. Commander Sereth will come soon. She will begin your instruction. Great, Ethan said weakly. Nothing like studying alien politics while on bed rest. Asura smiled. She will not be gentle. Figured. A faint chirp came from Ethan's cradle as the Mendic field shifted. A display beside him lit up with symbols he couldn't read. Asura leaned over, her brows tightening. Your lattice is stabilizing, she said. Good. You will walk soon. Walk, Ethan echoed nervously. Is that a requirement for these lessons? Asura gave him a teasing look. Sereth has little patience for sitting audiences. He groaned. Perfect. A soft knock sounded at the door. One of the guards opened it just enough for Sereth to step inside. Her expression was sharper than before, her posture rigid with purpose. Human, she said. Princess. Asura stood respectfully. Ethan attempted a nod. Sereth continued. The matriarch has given her ruling. You are to begin preparation for your role within the bond. Ethan blinked. My role? Yes, Sereth said. Your place at the side of the princess is no small matter. And if our enemies intend to exploit you, then we must ensure you cannot be easily exploited. That sounds ominous. It is reality, Sereth said simply. Asura leaned forward. Sereth, go gently. Sereth huffed. Gently is inefficient. Asura's filaments flared in displeasure. After a beat, Sereth sighed. I will moderate. Asura nodded, satisfied. Sereth turned to Ethan. Your first lesson begins now. Now, Ethan yelped. I'm literally in a medical cradle. You have a functioning mind, Sereth replied. That is sufficient. Asura giggled behind her hand. Sereth drew closer, and Ethan's pulse jumped. Lesson 1, she said, her gaze fierce. You must understand why someone would risk destabilizing the throne itself to eliminate a child. Ethan inhaled. Asura stepped closer. Sereth's voice dropped to a razor-edge whisper. It is because someone fears what she will become. Ethan's stomach twisted. Asura's eyes widened. And that was when the lights flickered, once, twice. Then the entire room shuddered as if struck from below. The guards snapped to alert. Sereth drew her weapon in a single motion. Asura grabbed Ethan's hand, and a voice crackled through the ceiling speakers. Breach detected. Inner citadel compromised. Ethan felt his blood turn to ice. It had begun. Ethan felt the walls of the chamber expand around him as the matriarch's words settled into his mind, fitting into place like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized he was assembling. The cradle supporting him vibrated gently with the hum of the ship's inner systems, its energy fields rising and falling in subtle waves that calmed the deeper aches in his chest. Asura remained close, hovering with an earnest protectiveness that felt far too big for her small frame, yet utterly unshakable. The guards around them stood like pillars, unblinking and vigilant, their armor reflecting the warm glow of the chamber's ancient lights. Ethan found his senses sharpening now that the shock of the matriarch's visit had worn off. The soft echo of distant footsteps, the faint shifting of armored plates, the rhythmic breath of the princess beside him. Everything felt more vivid, more alive. He didn't know how to describe the sensation except to say that he felt himself at the hinge of something much larger than he had ever imagined. It was absurd. He was a mechanic, a man who had spent most of his life tweaking faulty engines and rerouting coolant lines on freighters that smelled like recycled air and burnt coffee. Now he lay in a royal citadel at the heart of an alien empire, a child princess at his side, 8 assassins dead because of a choice he had made in an instant. The space between who he had been and who he was expected to become stretched uncomfortably across every breath he took. The guards shifted formation as the chamber's inner shielding adjusted to a heightened security mode. Ethan noticed faint ripples of violet energy shimmer across the doorframe, a layering of protective fields that made the air buzz against his skin. Asura was watching them with a familiar tension, her filaments rising and falling in small arcs that betrayed her worry, and he felt a strange urge to reassure her despite the fact that she clearly understood this world far better than he did. "You don't have to stay right next to me," he murmured softly, though not dismissively. "I'm not going to disappear the second you blink." Asura's gaze flicked up to him, her expression caught between indignation and earnest determination. "You almost did," she said, as though it were a simple statement of fact rather than an emotion-laden confession. "You went very far into the dark. I will not allow you to go there again." Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't know how to respond to that kind of devotion from anyone, much less a royal child who barely understood humans, yet seemed to understand him with startling clarity. Before he could summon a reply, the door parted with a soft, symmetrical whisper, and Commander Sereth entered, her posture lined with an intensity that seemed sharper than usual. She took in the room at a glance. Ethan's position, Asura's proximity, the guards' placements, before striding toward them with a deliberateness that made Ethan's heart trip unevenly. The cradle's interface pulsed once in response to her presence, as though acknowledging the chain of command. "The matriarch has informed me," Sereth said without preamble, "that you are now to begin preliminary preparation for your role within the bond." Ethan stared at her. "You mean the role I didn't know existed until an hour ago?" Sereth's expression didn't shift. "Correct." Asura rose immediately, placing herself between Sereth and the cradle with an instinctive protectiveness that made one of the guards subtly adjust her stance. Sereth didn't seem offended by the princess's interposition, but she did tilt her head in a way that conveyed both respect and gentle reprimand. "Princess," she said evenly, "you must allow me to instruct him. His ignorance is a weakness our enemies may already be probing." Asura hesitated, then stepped aside, but only barely, just enough to give Sereth access to Ethan without relinquishing her closeness. Sereth lifted her wrist, and a projection unfolded into the air, symbols, diagrams, branching lines of motion and meaning that Ethan couldn't decipher. She began speaking in low, deliberate tones. "You must understand what motivates those who would kill a child," she said, "and why they would risk destabilizing the throne." Ethan swallowed hard. "Right. Casual bedtime topics." Sereth blinked in a way that might have been mild exasperation. "You choose inappropriate moments for humor." Ethan managed a thin smile. "You're not wrong." Sereth dismissed the projection and looked at him directly. "Your survival was not expected. That alone has changed the trajectory of multiple factions. Some will react out of fear, others out of opportunity, and some may react out of something far more dangerous, belief." Ethan's brows knitted. "Belief in what?" Sereth paused, as though weighing whether to continue. Then, "Belief that the princess's bond to an outsider is a sign of coming change." The air thickened with unspoken tension. Asura's filaments dimmed into a subdued glow, her expression shifting into something wistful and thoughtful at once. Ethan tried to piece together the implications, but Sereth pressed forward with the relentless clarity of a seasoned commander. "Change attracts both hope and hostility," she said. "There are those who have long harbored fears that the Dominion has grown stagnant, bound by its own tradition. Your act, saving the princess with no thought of gain, has already been spoken of among the court as something disruptive." Ethan blinked. "Disruptive? I wasn't trying to disrupt anything." Sereth nodded. "Precisely why it has power." She stepped closer, her shadow falling across the cradle. "What you must understand is that the princess is not merely a child. She is the future of the Dominion. Every alliance, every law, every inheritance of command flows through her. And now you, through your bond, have been woven into that future." Ethan exhaled shakily. "I'm not ready for that." Asura touched his arm with gentle firmness. "You do not need to be ready alone." Something in her voice steadied him more than any explanation Sereth could give. He nodded slightly, though his mind churned with unease and reluctant acceptance. Sereth seemed to note the shift in his expression. "Good," she said. "You are processing. That is the first step toward preparation." Ethan snorted softly. "Does that mean I'm passing the class?" Sereth gave him a long look. "No." The chamber trembled. It was slight at first, a vibration like a deep engine shifting thrust lines. But then it intensified, rolling through the floor with a jarring undertone that forced the guards to widen their stance. Asura's hand tightened around Ethan's. Saratha's expression hardened instantly as she reached for her weapon. The lights flickered once, then again, bathing the room in uneven pulses of white and indigo. A disembodied voice crackled through the ceiling, mechanical and urgent. Breach detected. Inner citadel compromised. Ethan froze, blood rushing cold as instinct drew him upright against the cradle's restraints. Sarath barked an order in Lathari, and the guards moved as one, sealing the room's inner panels and activating overlapping shields that cast shimmering hexagonal patterns across the walls. Asura stepped closer to Ethan, placing both hands on the edge of the cradle as if her presence alone could anchor him. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline sharpen every nerve. This wasn't training. This wasn't conversation. This was danger, real and immediate. And he had no armor, no weapon, no idea how to defend himself or the child who insisted on standing beside him. "What does breach mean here?" Ethan asked, trying not to let panic crack his voice. "Is someone inside?" Saratha's gaze snapped to him, sharp and unyielding. "It means," she said, "that our enemy has found a way into the most secure deck of the Star-Old, and they are coming for one of you." Ethan's stomach twisted painfully. He could almost feel the blades again, slicing through air, through him. But then Asura leaned closer, her voice quiet but fierce. "They will not take you," she whispered. "Not while I stand here." Ethan wanted to argue. She was a child. She shouldn't be protecting him. But the sincerity in her voice splintered his protest. The walls vibrated again. A sharper alarm blared through the deck, echoing through the chamber like a living heartbeat. Sarath stepped into the center of the room, silhouetted by the glow of her armor. "Princess," she commanded, "you must step behind the shield wall." Now, Asura hesitated, torn between obedience and defiance. Ethan forced himself to speak. "Go," he rasped. "Don't argue. Please." Asura looked at him, really looked, and something in her resolved. She stepped back, retreating behind a shimmering field just as panels unfolded around her like protective wings. The cradle adjusted itself, angling Ethan into a safer position without his command. Sarath raised her weapon, and the guards formed a defensive arc around the door. A silence fell, thick, electric, expectant, as if the ship were holding its breath. Then, from beyond the sealed entrance, came the sound Ethan most feared, the distinct metallic whine of cutting tools carving through reinforced alloy. They hadn't breached the wrong deck. They were coming exactly where they intended. And Ethan knew, with certainty so sharp it burned, that the next move he made would change everything that followed. The door exploded inward. The explosion that tore through the chamber doors was not a single burst of force, but a rolling wave of pressure and white-hot fragments, flaring outward like the blossom of some violent star. Ethan instinctively threw an arm across his face, even though the cradle's field flickered automatically into a hardened shell around him, absorbing most of the kinetic impact. The shock wave rattled through his bones, silencing every coherent thought except the immediate, primal recognition of danger. Through the blur of smoke and dissipating energy, he caught the shifting silhouettes of Sarath and her guards as they surged into motion, their armor brightening with defensive glyphs. The sound was overwhelming, a shriek of torn metal, the hiss of venting atmosphere, the sharp crack of weapons charging. Ethan's heart hammered a war drum rhythm that drowned out almost everything else. Almost, because beneath it, he heard Asura shout his name, her voice muffled by the shielded alcove where she had taken refuge. He forced himself to focus, to see through the chaos, and spotted her faint outline behind the shimmering barrier. She was safe for now, and yet the fear etched in her posture told him she understood exactly what was at stake. The attackers had not come for her by accident. They breached the inner citadel with purpose, violence, and precision. Either she or Ethan, or perhaps both, were the targets of this assault. And Sereth clearly knew it too, because in the instant following the explosion, she moved like a creature born from war itself. 3 intruders burst through the smoldering doorway, clad not in the flowing armor of the Lathari, but in matte black suits lined with red circuitry, their helmets featureless except for thin vertical slits glowing with a vicious crimson light. Ethan had never seen their kind before, but the way Sereth stiffened told him they were far worse than ordinary mercenaries. "Syndicate Veshk," she hissed, her voice colder than vacuum frost. She raised her weapon, an elegantly curved blade pulsing with electric light, and met the first attacker in a collision of speed and brutality that made Ethan's stomach clench. The room erupted into close-quarters combat. The guards flanked the intruders, their movements coordinated and disciplined, each strike flowing into the next with a ferocity tempered by precision. Sereth moved differently, less like a soldier and more like a force of nature. Her blade carved arcs of incandescent light, deflecting blows with the kind of effortless fury that only decades of discipline could forge. Sparks sprayed from clashing weapons, scattering like stars across the polished floor. And through it all, Ethan could do nothing but lie trapped in the cradle, helpless, weak, painfully aware that if the attackers reached him, he would be nothing but a liability. His hands trembled as he tightened them around the cradle's edges. His ribs throbbed with every ragged breath. He felt the maddening urge to stand, to fight, to help, but his body was still barely capable of supporting its own weight, much less contributing to a battle that raged with inhuman intensity. Asura pressed both palms against her barrier, her eyes wide with terror and anger. Ethan met her gaze, and for a brief instant, he wished desperately that he could be the kind of warrior she clearly believed him capable of becoming. One of the intruders broke away from Sereth's clash, spinning toward Ethan's cradle with a weapon that resembled a serrated spear crackling with unstable energy. The guard nearest him launched into pursuit, intercepting the attacker with a two-handed strike that sent the spear clattering against the ground. But the attacker recovered faster than expected, sweeping the guard's legs from beneath her and planting a boot against her throat. Ethan's breath seized. The attacker twisted, reorienting toward the cradle and toward Ethan. A flicker of triumph ignited behind the crimson visor. Ethan braced for the worst. But before the intruder took a second step, something bright and sudden streaked across the chamber. Asura. She had disabled her shield somehow and was sprinting straight into the fray, small and determined and terrifying in her courage. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. "Asura! No!" he shouted, the cradle's restraints digging into his shoulders as he tried to sit up. His warning was swallowed by the echoing crack of a kinetic pulse. Not from the attacker. From Asura. A device in her hands glowed fiercely as she discharged a blast that struck the intruder square in the chest, staggering them backward several feet. Sereth whirled, eyes widening with momentary fear. "Princess!" But the warning came too late. The remaining attackers veered toward Asura at once, recognizing her vulnerability. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. Adrenaline shoved past pain. He surged against the cradle's restraints, muscles screaming. For one impossible breath, he thought he could break free by sheer willpower alone. Sereth intercepted the first attacker before they reached Asura, slamming her blade into his armor with enough force to crack it open. The guard who had fallen moments earlier rolled back to her feet, grabbing her discarded weapon and diving into the fray with renewed fury. Asura staggered backward, overwhelmed by the recoil of her device, and Ethan's heart lodged itself somewhere between terror and awe. She was brave, recklessly so, too brave for her own safety. And if any of the attackers managed to slip past Sereth's line, she would not survive a second encounter. Ethan felt helplessness choke him. He had never hated his injuries as fiercely as he did now, never despised his own frailty with such raw intensity. The cradle's internal systems detected his escalating vitals and attempted to stabilize him, but he fought against the soothing pulses, his mind consumed by one desperate thought. I won't watch her die. Not again. Not ever. The chamber's air vibrated with weapons fire and the feral cries of combat. Saratha's movements grew sharper, faster, as if she had abandoned restraint. One attacker fell, then another. But the third broke away once more, weaving a path through the chaos with alarming agility, straight toward Asura. Ethan felt something fracture inside him. Pain, rage, fear, all merging into a single, overwhelming impulse. Protect her. He forced himself upright with a guttural sound that barely resembled anything human. The cradle screamed warnings, its fields destabilizing as he pushed against their limits. Every nerve of his chest blazed, his vision blurred, but he managed to reach an angle where he could hurl the only object within reach, a medical instrument clamped to the cradle's side, directly at the attacker. It struck the intruder's helmet with a sharp metallic crack, not enough to injure, but enough to break their focus. They turned toward Ethan with a snarl visible even behind the visor's glow. For a single heartbeat, the world narrowed into a thin, merciless line. The attacker raised their weapon. Asura screamed his name. Ethan flinched instinctively, only to see Saratha's blade pierce through the intruder from behind. The attacker collapsed, the red circuitry on their armor flickering out like dying embers. Silence settled abruptly, broken only by the hum of the shields and Asura's uneven breathing. Sarath stood over the fallen attacker, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her armor bore new scorch marks, and a thin line of violet blood traced the curve of her jaw. She scanned the chamber, checking for threats, until she confirmed the breach was contained. Only then did she turn toward Ethan. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes, those sharp, commanding eyes, held something startlingly close to gratitude. "Human," she said, voice low, "you should not have moved." Ethan collapsed back into the cradle with a wheeze. "You're welcome," he managed. Asura rushed to his side, tears brightening the corners of her eyes. "You hurt yourself," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why did you do that?" Ethan looked at her, his breath thin and ragged. "Because," he rasped, "you're worth protecting." Asura covered her mouth with both hands. Saratha's gaze softened in a way that startled even the guards. But the moment of stillness did not last. The fallen intruder's armor flickered with strange patterns, their circuitry pulsing irregularly. Sarah stepped closer, frowning. "They're transmitting," she said sharply. The breach was a probe. They weren't attempting extraction. Ethan's confusion deepened. Probe? Extraction of who? Sarah spun toward him, her expression darkening. "You," she said. "Your survival needed confirmation." A chill like liquid ice slid down Ethan's spine. Sareth continued. "Whoever controls the Syndicate Veshk now knows you live. They know you fought back, and they know the princess is willing to break protocol to protect you." Asura stiffened defensively. "I will not apologize for valuing his life." Sareth didn't reprimand her. She only sighed with the weary resignation of someone realizing the battlefield had just widened beyond her sight. She gestured for the guards to secure the fallen attackers. "The matriarch must be informed immediately," she said. Then, turning to Ethan, "You have changed the shape of our conflict, human, not by intention, but by instinct." Ethan's breath trembled. "Is that bad?" Sareth paused at the doorway, her silhouette framed by the fractured metal of the breach. "It is," she said quietly, "inevitable." The cradle's stabilizers hissed softly as the chamber's shields lowered back into their resting patterns. Asura remained at Ethan's side, her hand slipping into his with fragile but unyielding determination. He squeezed gently, though his strength wavered. Pain radiated through his chest in rhythmic waves. But beneath it, a strange, resolute calm took root. The battle had revealed more than danger. It had revealed connection between him and Asura, between him and this world he still barely understood. And it had revealed something in him he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Asura turned to him with a seriousness far too old for her young features. "You cannot face this alone," she said. "Not anymore." Ethan exhaled, allowing honesty to reach the surface. "I don't want to," he admitted. Asura smiled faintly, her tears shimmering like starlight refracted through water. "Good," she whispered, "because you won't." Sereth returned, her expression composed but urgent. "We must relocate," she said. "Now." The breach exposed weaknesses in the Citadel's inner grid, and the Veshk are not finished. Ethan struggled to keep his eyes open, the pain and exhaustion clawing deeper. Where are we going?" Sereth approached, her shadow falling across him like a protective shield. "Somewhere safer," she said, "and somewhere you must begin to stand, not just survive." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Stand?" Sereth nodded. "Your bond to the princess is no longer symbolic. It is a fulcrum in a shifting war. You must learn to hold your weight in it." Asura squeezed his hand. "And I will stand with you." Ethan closed his eyes, letting the words anchor him. When he opened them again, the chamber lights seemed brighter, the air clearer, the path forward, though terrifying, slightly more defined. Sereth gestured for the guards to prepare the evacuation. "We leave at once," she commanded. "The matriarch awaits us in the high sanctuary. And there, human, your training will begin." Ethan's chest tightened with apprehension. Training, as if he were some kind of soldier. But then he caught Asura's expression, hopeful, trusting, certain, and something steadied inside him. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't royalty. He wasn't even healthy enough to walk unassisted. But he had lived. He had protected her. And he would do so again. Sereth stepped beside the cradle as the guards activated its transit field. "Prepare yourself," she said quietly. "The path ahead is not easy. But you chose at the moment you stepped into those blades." Ethan breathed in slowly. "Yeah," he murmured. "I guess I did." Asura leaned closer, her voice soft but resolute. "And I will walk it with you." The doors sealed. The chamber darkened. And as the cradle lifted, Ethan saw, perhaps for the first time, not just danger, but destiny stretching before him. The evacuation from the breached Citadel chamber unfolded with a solemn urgency that settled under Ethan's skin like an electric current. The guards formed a tight protective ring around the cradle, their armor humming with overcharged shields prepared for another assault. Asura stayed close to his side, refusing to be led away despite Sereth's firm gestures for her to maintain distance. The hallway outside the chamber bore fresh scars from the attacker's incursion. Panels scorched, fragments of alloy scattered like broken teeth across the floor. The Starhold's inner lights flickered in pale, uncertain tremors, casting elongated shadows that moved like uneasy spirits against the walls. Ethan forced himself to breathe steadily, though each inhale rasped against the half-healed tension in his ribs. The cradle floated with mechanical grace, absorbing every small jolt, but his body felt the memory of motion as pain. Still, pain meant he was alive. Pain meant he had done something that mattered. The guards guided them quickly down a corridor that sloped into a quieter stretch, insulated from the panicked energy reverberating through the ship. Sereth walked at the front of the formation with a purposeful stride, scanning every intersection and upper partition for signs of ambush. Her blade remained unsheathed, its edge shimmering with contained fury. Ethan watched her, marveling at how someone could be so rigidly disciplined and yet allow moments of raw emotion to seep through. She had felt fear for Asura. Ethan had seen it. Not weakness, but something deeper. Something like protectiveness born over decades of duty. And now he, inexplicably, was part of that duty. His chest tightened with the weight of it. They reached a transit lift that glowed with a different hue than those Ethan had seen before. Golden at its edges, inscribed with ancient patterns that seemed more ceremonial than functional. When the platform activated, a faint chime resonated like a chorus of distant bells, and Ethan felt the air shift around them, thickening before dissolving into a strange absence of pressure. The world blurred, then snapped back into clarity as the lift deposited them into a corridor so pristine and quiet it felt like stepping into another dimension of the ship entirely. Asura let out a small breath of wonder, though she had clearly been here before. Ethan's cradle adjusted its altitude as Sereth led them toward a towering archway framed by pale, crystalline structures that pulsed with slow, deliberate energy. The corridor beyond was lined with statues crafted in a style Ethan didn't recognize. Tall, elegant forms carved with impossible precision. Some appeared to be monarchs of ages past, others guardians, others scholars or inventors. Asura drifted closer to the statues with a soft reverence in her eyes, as though she were walking among her ancestors. Ethan felt strangely humbled by the sense of history pressing in from every side. The air tasted different here, cooler, infused with something metallic and faintly sweet, like the aftermath of lightning. Sereth paused before the archway and turned back toward Ethan. Her expression carried a mixture of caution and inevitability. "This is the high sanctuary," she said, "the holiest and most fortified place aboard the Starold. Only the royal family and the guardians sworn to protect them may enter." She added with a subtle shift of tone, "And now, the one bound to the princess." The high sanctuary opened into a vast chamber whose domed ceiling shimmered with an ever-shifting tapestry of constellations. At first, Ethan assumed it to be a projected display of the Dominion star maps, but as he watched, the constellations shifted, contorting, bending into shapes that could not be found in any astronomical chart. They told stories, ancient ones, scenes of battles, coronations, eclipses, migrations across the void. Ethan felt the air around him stir as though responding to the images overhead, and the cradle drifted forward into the heart of the sanctuary. At the center of the chamber stood a circular platform of black stone veined with threads of violet luminescence. The matriarch awaited them there, wearing ceremonial armor instead of her flowing indigo mantle. The suit was sculpted from layers of pale silver, each segment inscribed with runes that glowed faintly under the shifting starlight above. Her presence felt immense, filling the chamber even before she spoke a word. Asura rushed ahead, bowing her head respectfully, though the matriarch touched her shoulder with gentle familiarity. Ethan felt the cradle draw closer until he rested before the raised platform. For a long moment, the matriarch studied him, her gaze neither harsh nor soft but weighing, evaluating, as though determining how much force a human heart could endure before breaking. "The breach," she said at last, her voice echoing with a natural resonance the room seemed designed to amplify, "was not meant to succeed. It was meant to test us, to measure the speed and strength of our response." She began to pace along the platform's edge, her gestures smooth, economic. "The Syndicate Veshk is not acting alone. No faction with such limited access could have penetrated the inner citadel so cleanly. Someone within our dominion has betrayed us." Her words hung in the air like drifting embers. Asura inhaled sharply. Ethan swallowed uneasily. Betrayal was a universal language. Humans and Lathari alike understood the sting of it. The matriarch continued, "The princess's bond to you is the fulcrum of this conflict. Some view it as a sign of weakness, others as a sign of dangerous possibility. Factions will move to manipulate it, to break it, or to weaponize it." Ethan hesitated. "Weaponize? Me?" A faint smile touched the matriarch's lips, grim, knowing. "They misunderstand the nature of the bond. They think it grants influence. They do not understand that it grants responsibility." Asura stepped closer to Ethan, her expression earnest, almost pleading. "Mother, he did not choose this. He does not deserve to be used as a pawn in their games." The matriarch's gaze softened. "I know, child. Yet here he stands, willing to lift what others would cast aside." She turned back to Ethan. "I asked you once whether you would make the same choice again, knowing its cost. Now I ask another question. Will you walk the path that your choice has opened?" Ethan's breath trembled. He felt fractured, still weakened from his injuries, barely recovered from the attack. But something deep inside him stirred, the same instinct that had driven him to shield Asura without thinking. The same instinct that had pushed him upright in the cradle to throw a useless tool at an armored assassin. "I don't know how to be whatever you need," he said quietly, "but I know I won't run." Asura exhaled in visible relief. Sereth nodded once, approving. The matriarch extended her hand toward the platform. "Then your training begins. Not as a warrior, not as a diplomat, but as one who must learn to stand in the storm without becoming part of it. The sanctuary lights dimmed, and the constellations above reshaped into images Ethan didn't understand. Clusters of symbols connected by shimmering lines. A holographic interface rose from the platform, swirling with runes and diagrams. Sereth moved to stand beside Ethan, now shifting from protector to instructor. Understanding our enemies begins with understanding our history, she said. The Dominion was forged through unity, but unity born from fracture. She gestured to the shifting images. This is the lineage spiral. Every conflict, every alliance, every betrayal in our history connects here. Somewhere within these threads lies the pattern behind today's attack. Ethan listened, absorbing, learning. Asura sat beside him, explaining symbols in a soft voice when they confused him. His mind felt stretched, challenged in ways entirely unfamiliar. But he wanted to understand. For her. For all of them. The training did not resemble anything Ethan associated with the word. There are no drills, no weapons, no tests of physical capacity. Instead, Sereth guided him through patterns of causality, teaching him how Lathari politics flowed like a web spun across centuries. She taught him how factions positioned themselves, how belief shaped conflict, how ancient grievances lay dormant until something, a choice, a symbol, a bond, stirred them awake. Ethan's perspective widened, the world shifting from a narrow corridor of personal survival into a vast network of interconnected consequences. And through it all, Asura remained beside him, watching him with pride that warmed him in places untouched by any Mendic field. Hours passed, maybe more. Time felt fluid in the sanctuary. But eventually, the matriarch raised a hand, and the projections dissolved. "Enough," she said. "You have taken the first step." Ethan slumped slightly, exhausted. Sereth studied him with thoughtful eyes. "He learns quickly," she murmured, almost to herself. "Too quickly," the matriarch replied. "There are those who will fear that." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the sanctuary lights flickered again, softly at first, then with a more aggressive pulse. Sereth stiffened. "Another breach?" "No," the matriarch said, closing her eyes in concentration. "A message." A sphere of pale light drifted down from the ceiling, hovering before her. Runes spiraled across its surface. The matriarch touched it, and the sphere unfolded into a projection of a trembling Lathari officer. "High Matriarch," the officer stammered. "We intercepted a transmission from a rogue relay near the outer belts. It carries a threat directed at the human." A chill coiled in Ethan's spine. Asura gasped. Sereth's hand moved to her blade. The message continued. "They claim the child was not the true target. They claim the human's existence endangers an ancient future. They say they will correct the imbalance." The projection dissolved. Silence crushed the room. The matriarch turned slowly toward Ethan. Not with anger, not with fear, but with a steady resolve that felt like the turning of a great engine deep beneath the ship's structure. "It appears," she said, "that your involvement runs deeper than chance." Ethan tried to breathe, but the weight of her gaze made the air feel thin. "I'm not special," he said weakly. "I was just there." "No," Asura said softly, placing her hand on his. "You were where you were needed." Ethan looked at her, and something inside him steadied, something that felt like truth. The matriarch stepped down from the platform, standing before him with a presence that made the sanctuary itself seem to bow. "They believe you threaten their future," she said, "which means you must learn how not to be destroyed by it." She gestured towards Sereth. "You will continue his education. Increase pace." Sereth bowed in acknowledgement. Ethan swallowed thickly. "This is becoming something I can't walk away from, isn't it?" Asura smiled sadly. "Destiny doesn't ask for permission." Ethan exhaled, letting acceptance settle where resistance had been. The matriarch raised her voice slightly, addressing the room itself. "Prepare the sanctum chambers. Defensive protocols, Tier 9. The human is no longer a bystander. He is now a participant in the shaping of our era." Her words echoed like a verdict, like a promise. A ripple of power moved through the sanctuary's walls. Lights brightened. The ancient constellations were formed into sharper, more urgent patterns. And Ethan, cradled between exhaustion and awakening purpose, braced himself for whatever the path ahead demanded of him. The future he had stumbled into was larger than he had imagined. Dangerous, shifting, full of enemies unseen. But he was not alone. Asura remained beside him. Sereth stood guard. The matriarch had placed her faith, however cautiously, in him. And somewhere in that realization, Ethan found the strength to lift his head and breathe through the fear. He was human. Humans adapted. Humans persisted. Humans protected those who needed them. He had done so once, without hesitation, and he would do so again. The sanctum chambers were unlike any space Ethan had seen aboard the Star-Old. Vast, silent, carved from stone older than the Dominion's recorded history and illuminated by steady pulses of violet light embedded in the walls. The guards guided his cradle to a raised dais at the center, where the air rippled with layered defensive fields designed to repel everything from physical intrusion to psychic interference. Asura walked beside him, her expression strained but determined, while Sereth remained only a step behind her, posture rigid with the knowledge that the danger surrounding Ethan had escalated far beyond political tension. The matriarch stood at the perimeter, conferring softly with a trio of high-ranking advisors whose armor bore intricate insignias denoting centuries of service. Ethan could feel the tension in the room, sharp, coiled, ready to spring. He sensed that every Lathari here understood something he did not yet know. Whatever force hunted him was not merely reacting to the disruption he'd caused, but anticipating the influence he might one day wield. When Sereth dismissed the advisors with a curt nod, the room shifted into a quiet, expectant stillness that made Ethan's breath catch. The matriarch approached him, her expression solemn. "Human Ethan Cole," she said, "the threat declared against you is not merely a threat against your life. It is a threat against the Dominion's future. We must reveal the truth that lies at the heart of this conflict." Asura reached for Ethan's hand, her filaments dimming with worry. He squeezed her fingers gently, bracing himself for whatever revelation was coming. The matriarch gestured to the walls surrounding the dais. The violet light threaded into brighter lines, each segment capturing flecks of shimmering particles that twisted and shaped themselves into geometric forms. Ethan watched as symbols and diagrams appeared, some he vaguely recognized from Sereth's earlier teachings, others that looked like ancient stories etched into mathematical patterns. Long before our dominion was forged, the matriarch began. Before the unification of the great houses, there existed a prophecy etched into the Cradle Codex, the oldest surviving artifact of our people. It spoke of a convergence, a moment when an outsider, one not born of our stars, would alter the path of the royal line. Ethan frowned. Alter the path how? Sereth answered for her. By becoming a variable in the succession. Ethan blinked, stunned. Succession? Like royal succession? Asura's grip tightened. Her eyes reflected the swirling projection of the prophecy, but they held a fear Ethan had never seen in her before. The matriarch nodded with a slow, solemn certainty. The prophecy declared that one from beyond our world would bind themselves to the heir of the Dominion. Their act would shape the balance of unity or fracture it entirely. Ethan felt himself sinking into the cradle support, breath thinning. "And you think that's me?" "No," Asura whispered. "We don't think. We know." The words struck him like a physical blow. Ethan stared up at the projected symbols, trying to reconcile the ordinary man he'd always been. A mechanic, a drifter, a survivor of too many small failures, with the monumental expectations thrust suddenly upon him. The matriarch continued. The prophecy was dismissed by some as metaphor. Others feared it, and still others, particularly those clinging to strict interpretations of bloodlines, saw it as a threat that must be eliminated before it could manifest. Her gaze sharpened. "Those are the factions who now hunt you." Sereth stepped forward, her tone measured but heavy. "The Syndicate Veshk is being used as a tool by those within our own dominion who believe the prophecy must be prevented at any cost. They think the bond you share with the princess fulfills one of its conditions. Ethan swallowed. Because I protected her? Asura shook her head. Because you chose us. Without hesitation. Without obligation. She looked at him with a softness that made his chest ache. Ladhari do not act that way. Not naturally. Ethan let her words sink in. He hadn't meant to challenge destiny. He hadn't meant to influence the future of an empire. He'd just seen a child in danger and moved. That was all. And yet, it wasn't all. Because he understood now why the attackers had not tried to kill Asura in the breach. Why they had turned toward him instead. Why the transmission had named him as the catalyst. They think, Ethan said slowly, that if they kill me, the prophecy ends. Saratha's eyes darkened. Yes. And they think if they kill you, the princess remains weak. Untested. Unchanged. Ethan's pulse hammered with a mix of fear and anger. He looked at Asura, saw her worry, her resolve, her trust, and something fierce ignited inside him. He didn't care about prophecies. He didn't care about royal succession. But he cared about her. The matriarch raised her hand, dissolving the projection. You must understand the truth of your position, Ethan Cole. You are not destined for rulership, nor expected to bear political authority. But your presence shapes the one who will. The bond you forged in blood and sacrifice has accelerated her path. Asura's gaze lowered. I was meant to learn leadership slowly. Through ceremony. Through counsel. Through tradition. She lifted her eyes to Ethan again. But the moment you stood between me and death, the universe shifted. Ethan's throat tightened. Asura, I didn't mean to. She cut him off gently. I know, and that is why it matters. The matriarch approached, her bearing regal yet unexpectedly gentle. The future of the Dominion depends not on your lineage, but on your heart. Ethan felt exposed under her gaze. Seen, judged, but not condemned. You must decide, the matriarch said, whether you will walk the path that has been opened, or whether you will step aside and force the universe to adapt without you. The weight of the question pressed down on him with suffocating gravity. Every logical instinct screamed to step aside, to return to anonymity, to escape the crosshairs of ancient prophecies and interstellar politics. But then he felt Asura's hand, small, steady, trusting, and he knew, with painful clarity, that stepping aside would endanger her even more. Ethan exhaled slowly. Tell me what I need to do. A ripple of approval crossed the matriarch's face. Sarath inclined her head, respect evident in the motion. First, Sarath said, you must learn to harness the one advantage humans possess that Ladhari cannot replicate. Ethan blinked. Which is? Asura answered, her voice filled with a kind of quiet awe. Your unpredictability. Sarath nodded. Ladhari instincts are shaped by centuries of pattern and logic. You break patterns. You choose paths no Ladhari would consider. That is why you survived 8 blades. That is why you acted in the breach. That is why you changed the council's assumptions simply by breathing. Ethan rubbed his forehead. So my greatest strength is not knowing what I'm doing. Sarath gave him a thin smile. More accurately, choosing without being constrained by our cultural logic. Asura's filaments glowed faintly. It means you can surprise our enemies. Ethan let out a slow, shaky breath. I can work with that, he said, though he wasn't entirely sure he could. The matriarch gestured toward the dais. Prepare him. Sarath and Asura moved in tandem, adjusting the cradle's field, shifting its slope until Ethan was upright and supported. Sarath projected patterns of movement and strategy, explaining their significance in measured, precise language. Asura explained the emotional subtext, the cultural resonance, translating Saratha's austere lessons into something Ethan could understand. He absorbed everything because he had to, not simply for his own survival, but for hers. But the deeper the training went, the more a question gnawed at him. Why had destiny woven him into the princess's life so violently? What made him matter in a universe filled with beings far more powerful and ancient than him? He didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he felt the truth circling him, waiting for the moment he became brave enough to face it. When the training finally paused, Ethan felt drained and aching, but sharper than before. The matriarch studied him with a contemplative expression. "You learned faster than expected," she said. "Your willingness to adapt speaks well of your path ahead." Ethan's breath shuddered. "I'm trying. I don't want to fail her." Asura looked at him, eyes filled with warmth that cut through the cold fear swirling inside him. "You won't." But before Ethan could absorb the reassurance, the sanctuary lights dimmed. This time, not in warning, but in a deep, solemn shift. A low, melodic hum vibrated through the room as the constellations overhead rearranged into new shapes. Sereth stiffened. "A call to the lineage council," she murmured. The matriarch stepped forward as a massive circular portal opened near the far end of the sanctuary. The portal displayed the faces of dozens of high-ranking officials, some stern, some curious, some openly hostile. Ethan tensed, sensing the importance of this moment. The matriarch addressed the gathered council. "The outsider stands beside my daughter not by chance, but by destiny." A murmur rippled across the council as the matriarch continued. "He has survived what should have killed him. He has stood against assassins with no training. He has protected the heir, and he has forged a bond that cannot be unwound." Ethan felt every gaze shift to him, judging, measuring, underestimating. The matriarch lifted her chin. "The council must accept that the path forward includes him. Those who oppose this truth endanger not only the royal line, but the dominion itself." A tense silence followed, until one elder spoke. "Then let the outsider prove his worth," the elder said. "A test." Ethan saw it in their eyes. Something dangerous. Something ancient. The matriarch nodded once. "Very well." She turned to Ethan. "The council demands a demonstration of courage, of instinct, of loyalty." Ethan's heart pounded. "What kind of demonstration?" Saratha's voice was steady. "One that will reveal whether you stand as protector or liability." Asura grabbed his arm. "You don't have to do this." Ethan cut her off with a small shake of his head. "Yes," he said softly. "I do." Asura's expression crumpled with fear and pride. Sarath placed a hand over her heart in a formal gesture. "We stand beside you." The matriarch gestured, and the chamber transformed. The constellations overhead flickered into a projection, an environment of jagged stone pillars and shifting shadows, a simulated battleground woven from ancient tradition. Ethan's cradle lowered him gently onto solid ground. He wobbled, but remained standing, his body supported by a web of stabilizing energy. Asura gasped and tried to rush to him, but Sarath held her back. This is his moment. Ethan inhaled deeply. The air felt heavy, electric. A figure materialized before him, a warrior draped in ceremonial armor, faceless yet imposing. Not a real foe, but a symbolic one. A test of spirit. "You must face this challenge as a human," the matriarch said. "Not with weapons, not with armor, with heart." Ethan stared at the warrior, his ribs throbbing, his breath shallow. He felt small, weak, utterly unqualified, but he also felt Asura's eyes on him, trusting him, believing in him. And so, he stepped forward. The warrior moved instantly, a blur of motion that Ethan barely avoided by twisting to the side. Pain lanced through his chest, but he pushed through it. He ducked under a sweeping strike, losing his balance, but catching himself on a stone pillar. The warrior pressed relentlessly, its movements precise and punishing. Ethan dodged again, heart slamming against his ribs. He had no technique, no strategy, only instinct. And instinct told him one thing: survive long enough to understand the pattern. The warrior shifted its stance. Ethan recognized the moment, the brief pause before a heavier strike. He didn't run. He didn't cower. He looked at the warrior and stepped into the blow. Not recklessly, not suicidally, but with purpose. The warrior's strike met Ethan's shoulder, driving him to one knee, but his free hand shot forward, slamming against the warrior's chest plate. He didn't know why he did it. He only knew it felt right. The warrior staggered backward, its form fracturing into shimmering shards before dissolving completely. Silence fell. The projection faded. Ethan collapsed onto both knees, shaking. Asura broke free and sprinted to him, catching him as he swayed. Saratha's expression shifted from shock to respect. The council murmured among themselves, surprised, unsettled, impressed. The matriarch raised her hand. "The outsider has proven his heart," she declared. "He stands not as a threat, but as an anchor to the air." She approached Ethan, placing a hand over his battered shoulder. "Rise, Ethan Cole. For today, the Dominion recognizes your place beside the princess." Ethan rose slowly, supported by Asura, exhausted, aching, but alive, and with a purpose clearer than ever. He wasn't destined to rule. He wasn't destined to fight. He was destined to protect. And he would. No prophecy, no faction, no enemy would take that from him now.